right. Welcome again to the Think Orphan podcast. This is Rick Morton along with my properly socially distanced co-host, Phil Dark. Phil, we can't be much more socially distanced than we are today.
That's true.
Alabama to California.
That's true, and it's pretty common. It's pretty common these days, and maybe a good thing because I got a little something that's keeping me down. So hopefully it won't get me down too much today. I don't think it will. I think I'm so excited about our guest today that will overcome anything that I got going on in my body. So how are you doing?
Well, hit us with it, man. I'm good. I'm ready for this interview. Ready to jump into this with you. So why don't you tell us about our guest?
Yeah, so our guest is the National Director of Training and Ministry Programs for the Children. You may know it as Royal Family Kids. They have camps and they have several other ministries. Jeff's going to tell us about the name change and also what the ministry does, as well as some really cool stuff that I've been able to talk with him about even before we were getting this interview going. So I'm excited for you guys to hear some of the amazing stuff that he has to share today. So as we've been saying over the last few weeks and few months, really, join the Facebook group, join the Think Orphan Facebook group. If you want to go deeper into the conversation and don't just join it, don't just click on it and say, okay, now I'm done. Really join the group and engage. Yeah, ask questions, share things that from the episodes that are questions from that you have about them, or things that really hit you and that your ministry is doing some different things maybe. So that's our hope for this show, is it doesn't end here. It doesn't end on this podcast, this recording, this download that you're doing, but it's actually something that we're, especially now in this time of COVID, where we are distanced and we are apart from each other. These mediums that we have on social media really are good things for us to be able to use. They have their shadow, they have their negative side, but I think this is a really good way to use it. So I do encourage you to do that. Also subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. That way you won't miss any episodes. But again, without any more of that from us, we're now going to get to it with Jeff Juhala.
Jeff, welcome.
Well, thank you.
We're excited to have you. And so Phil's kind of filled our listeners in a little bit on kind of the new name for a ministry with an established identity. And so, man, we're really glad to have you. And I'd love just for us to kind of kick off tonight, share with our listeners a little bit, how did you get engaged in this ministry, and how particularly were you drawn into caring for kids that are in state care?
So I had an interesting journey, a true calling. My wife and I had been involved in lots of ministries at church over the years. And the speaker from Royal Family Kids at the time came and spoke at our church trying to start up a camp. And we heard about it and we thought, great, as soon as somebody starts it, we'll sign up as camp counselors. So we heard about it on a Tuesday night, and then it totally evaporated from our brains. Never heard anything else, no other announcements, no nothing. But over a 2-year period, we really felt God putting a burden on our hearts for orphans. It was one of those series of years where it seemed like every couple of months, orphan care popped up in our minds. I heard a great message on Focus on the Family about the orphanages in Cambodia. We had a lady that would come to our church and talk to us about the orphanages in Romania. We had a missionary speaker come by and speak about the orphanages in India. And we really just felt this extra deep connection to orphan care. And we just knew something was stirring, something was happening, and that we had to get involved in it. We just didn't know what. And for a 2-year period, we just felt this sense. So one day I walked into my children's pastor's office, and he's the guy who had brought in Wayne Tesh, the founder of Royal Family Kids, to speak. And I walked into his office and I said, hey, my wife and I just really feel this stirring. I don't know what to do with it. We've been praying about it, but it's been 2 years. Maybe we should amp it up and have you pray about it. And he had this funny, quizzical look on his face. And he said, do you remember when that guy Wayne Tesh came and spoke 2 years ago? And I said, wow, yeah, that's the first I'd thought about that for the last 2 years. Whatever happened? And he said, I'll tell you what happened. Nothing happened. He said, Wayne spoke, several people were interested. He gave me his books, but nothing happened. He said, I've been handing his book out to people and asking for 2 years. And my wife and I have been praying for 2 years. Will you be the camp director? Will you be the camp director? And everybody has turned us down. He said, Jeff, today, I walk into my office and I found some extra books on the shelf that Wayne had left. And he said, my wife and I have been praying about this for 2 years and nothing's happened. So I took the books off the shelf and I threw them in the trash can. And I essentially said, Lord, the dream is get done. I'm going to move on to other things. And so he turned around at his desk and reached into the trash can and pulled out one of the books and said, maybe God's been calling you guys to work with orphans right here in America. So it's like, wow, out of the trash can, the dream was revived. And it was a pretty special moment for us to sit there and think, wow, he threw away the dream. He was literally in the trash can and he pulled the book out. So we read the book and we felt super connected to it. Went to training. We were absolutely blown away by the training that we had seen, the 6 days, in immersion experience at a summer camp where all these foster kids were running around. And we just felt, wow, we felt one thing, completely overwhelmed by running this 1 week camp ministry. We had to raise $20,000. We had to get 30 adults to take a week off. We had to get the government to say yes to giving us kids. We were blown away, but we were also so mesmerized by the thought that we could do this ministry for foster children. And we were both good kids who came from good homes, my wife and I. So this was new to us, new language, new concept. So we did that for 6 years up in Northern California. And 4 years into it, we started to feel this stirring again, just like we had before. The stirring of this, every time something happened now, instead of getting involved with foster or orphanage, it was get involved in full-time ministry. And it was another 2-year cycle of, we felt the Lord stirring us. We felt for sure that we were going to go into full-time ministry and that we were going to move. And there's a lot of details that went into that stirring and into that account. But then we got a phone call and asked us to move down to Southern California and take over the training department here at Rural Family Kids now for the children. So that's the journey, a lot of stirring, a lot of calling, a lot of confidence building that God came alongside us and met us where we needed to be met. That doesn't mean the journey was easy. There were some pretty rough days, but we were able to get through the rough days because we were confident in the call.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, you kind of unpacked a little bit of for the children and Rural Family Kids, kind of your camp ministry there, and talked a little bit about the contours of it. But for those folks that are listening to our podcast that are unfamiliar with your ministry, what is it you found when you read the book and you got in and you did training and started to get immersed into the world of this ministry? Just kind of help our folks get a taste of who you guys are and really what you do in this space.
A guy named Wayne Tesh was 12 years old in upstate New York, went down to the altar and prayed, God, what am I supposed to do when I'm 12 years old? And he saw a vision of of kids' faces. Fast forward another 12 years, he takes his first job at 24 and he says, God, what am I supposed to do? And he saw a vision of kids' faces. And 12 years after that, he was given an opportunity to take foster children to a summer camp. He'd been doing church camp with church kids for years and got really good at it, was kind of known as the camp guy. So now he's got an opportunity to take foster children to camp. And what he didn't know was all the things that he didn't know, right? He tried to take these children who were not typical of going to church on a Sunday, sitting in a classroom and doing a craft, and take them to summer camp. So he tried to treat it as a church camp with church kids, and it just blew up in his face. It was a disaster on every single level except one. And the one level it wasn't a disaster was it really connected and impacted the kids. So regardless of the disaster that the adults experienced, the kids had a great time. The kids were absolutely amazed. The kids were up in the mountains. The kids were in the outdoors. The kids were swimming. The kids were having as much food as they wanted to have, right? So to the adults, it was a disaster. To the kids, it was heaven, right? I mean, isn't that so much the case when you step into foster care or orphan care? What we can see as a disaster, but what the kids see is a different thing. So from there, they discovered it was a hit, even though they had to work through some of the issues. And they started training other churches on how to do this 1 week summer camp for foster children. And they started training other groups. And that was 1985, the first camp. And now this last year, not 2020, this year, because this is a different year, of course, but 2019, we had 214 chapters around the country, another 45 overseas. We had almost 9,000 foster children attend a 1 week camp. 2008, we added on a mentoring club because a lot of the kids, we'd only see them once a year and we wanted to do more. So we added on a mentoring club that would see them through the school year. So essentially what we do is a 5-day summer camp and a 9-month mentoring program, which is all geared for kids who have been through abuse, abandonment, neglect. And we go to the church, the local church, and say, we'll train you how to do this, but this is going to be your ministry. We'll partner with you, but you got to raise the money. You got to get the volunteers, but count it as your church ministry and what you're trying to do to get outside the walls of the church in an area that we used to say there's people behind the iron curtain, or there's people behind the bamboo curtain, where foster kids have been behind the government curtain for years.
Yeah. Right.
And we sort of like had this barrier between church and state, right? So part of the beauty of the ministry that I was attracted to was it gets in the middle of that barrier. It gets in the middle of that tension. And sometimes the tension is rich and sometimes the tension is pretty easy. But it gave us a chance to step into that world and say, let's do something. So that's essentially what we do, all for kids in foster care, all volunteers. This past year, 2019, we had 15,000 volunteers show up, take a week off, and give and give and give and live in the great. We call it an intervention camp because it really intervenes in their lives. And we're just trying to interrupt some of those cycles. And when you take a kid out of their common world and you put them in an uncommon place, then uncommon things begin to happen. Yeah. And that's part of the beauty of going.
I love hearing, and one of the things I want to make sure and just kind of point out from what you've said, we talk a lot about collaboration on this podcast, and we're constantly talking about ways that churches can work together and ways that ministries can partner together and all of those kind of things. But I don't want to miss you're talking about a collaboration between the church, between the by going into these areas and really being able to engage with the government. And so our collaboration is not limited to those things we do within the body of Christ. There's an incredible opportunity, and there's a gospel opportunity in us being able to collaborate and to connect with government.
Yeah, it's a great collaboration. I love it. I love the idea of the church and state working together for the noble cause of the kids in foster care and adoptive care, right? Some people find that tension very awkward. They don't know what to do. We go right to our churches and say, hey, because it's church and state, there's certain things we can't do. Like we can't do altar calls. We don't do communion. We don't do baptisms, right? And some people really bristle at that. But we operate in our lives all the time as Christians without those things, right? There's opportunities there where we do things with kids without those things. And one of the joys I have is trying to explain to our trainees how we can share the gospel without some of the typical methodologies that we look at. And it's a great joy for us to be able to do that we can still share Christ, we can still share our faith alongside the kids that we serve while balancing church and state issues.
Yeah, and so with it looks like we lost Rick here for a minute. But
yeah,
we'll get back. We can edit part out, but we'll just continue on.
Sure.
And so with that, with obviously the collaboration, the ministry that you're able to do with the camps, with the parents that are, or the parents, the adults that are actually able to go to the camps and help out, the churches that are partnering with the Royal Family Kids camps, which those names are the same. So you're not confused out there if you hear that the Royal Family Kids camps, those still exist, and that is the name. But really, what do you find that the kids experience? I mean, you kind of talked about it already. The kids are just loving it. But then what do you usually see from the adults' perspective? And I know some people who have been involved with it, and I've seen it firsthand as far as what that looks like. But just how have you seen the camps themselves really impact the adults in particular with how they think about orphan and vulnerable children, with how they care for orphan and vulnerable children?
Yeah, it's a very impactful week on the camp side because it's so intense. It's very immersive. You leave your family, you leave your work, you leave your kids, and you're living there for a week, and you're in this experience. So it's like going away on a missions trip, right? You're in it and you're living it. And we give a lot of training, and we tell a lot of horror stories, not to scare people away, but to prepare them. And a lot of the adults come away from it feeling like, wow, I had no idea. They tentatively step into this arena thinking, whoa, I've heard about this. I've heard about foster kids. I've heard about behaviors. I've heard about challenges. Now I'm in it. But when we have this collaboration with so many other adults, we always make sure we have a child specialist, like a social worker there. And we always have a lot of school teachers there. And we always have a Bible teacher there. And we always have specialists there to support everybody. We have tons of extra adults because the kids need it, but the adults also need it. So the impact on adults is it opens their eyes to a world they've seldom seen. If you're a school teacher, you've seen it. If you're a nurse, you've seen it. But so many other people come along and they've just never been in that world. And it opens their eyes, and it really, the spiritual part is it opens their heart. I think people are naturally drawn to help children who've been through abuse and abandonment. They just don't know what to do. And then when we give them an opportunity, they start to say, wow, I never knew this was out there, but now that I'm in it, I see that it's such a wonderful thing. And we imagine some horror stories in our minds because we've heard stories in the news. And then we find out, what? They're just regular kids. They're just kids that want to have fun. They're just kids that want to grow up. They're just kids that want to put their past behind them and have a better future. And when you get to see them and live with them for a week, it's changed a lot of our adults, meaning this: we now regularly track how many of our college kids change their major because they've gone to a week of camp, meaning they were a business major and now they get into social work, or they were a finance major and now they become a school teacher, or they didn't know what they wanted to do and now they jump into this arena because they say, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but man, I love this arena. Or we've got a lot of people that have thought about being foster parents but never took that step, and after doing a week with foster kids, with this team, they become foster parents. So they become adoptive parents. So annually, we have about 150 volunteers that step into foster care or adoptive care on that full-time basis because they've been encouraged, because they've seen it, because they have the support, because it's that thing that helps them get over the step and say, okay, we've been thinking about doing it, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so about 150 every year become foster parents or adoptive parents. And we have a whole bunch of college kids change their major to get into this arena as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's I didn't even think about that college major side of things. That's just really good to see that it's having such an impact. Well, I mean, we all know doing ministry that we often don't see the fruit of our work, right? You know, I mean, probably 99% of what we do, and we don't see anything, particularly in the work with orphan and vulnerable children that aren't in your home as foster kids or as adoptive kids. Then obviously you see more. But you know, in things like the camps, you go for a week. Sometimes you may have some you might connect with them afterwards or whatever. But a lot of times you don't. So, but when you're working with the camps and these different parts of your ministries, as Rick and I know, as Jeff, I mean, sometimes we do get these little glimpses. Sometimes we do get little nuggets that God just gives us, that little glimpse behind the curtain to see what the work that we've been doing. And usually, I mean, at least in my experiences, it comes right when we need it, right? Like when we're kind of bummed out about something, when we're discouraged about something. But we get glimpses into this impact that we are making. And can you just share a couple of those stories just so people can get an idea of, if we do little things, never underestimate the impact you might be having on lives, right? And I've said that to so many people, and I just love for you to give a couple stories, or one or two stories that kind of exemplify that.
Yeah, I got a couple of short ones and then a very impactful one. There's a quote by a guy named Thomas Carlyle. This is the quote: "When the oak is felled, the whole forest echoes with its fall, but 100 acorns are sown in silence by an unnoticed breeze." I love that quote because in what we do, we can notice the crashing tree. It's like the destruction that happens around kids' lives. Those are easy to see, but we don't see that when the life is sown, this acorn falls from the tree and begins new life. And he uses this word, are sown in silence by an unnoticed breeze. And I started using that word, unnoticed moments, that we have unnoticed moments that happen that we would call it a throwaway line or a throwaway moment. So here's two quick short ones. We had a volunteer in Springfield, Missouri, walking through the mall. And a camper came up to her in the mall and said, Miss So-and-so, do you remember me from camp? And the gal says, oh, yes, how are you? And the little girl immediately says, do you remember when we finished that puzzle together? And the woman was thinking, I don't even remember doing a puzzle with this little girl. It was a busy week, a lot going on. But she said, wow, I'm sure we had a good time and everything. And immediately the little girl says, it's the first puzzle I've ever finished in my life. And we would do a puzzle and not really think much of it, right? But to this little girl, this moment in time, it stood out to her. She said, it was the first puzzle I ever finished in my life. Now, is that a spiritual moment? No, it's not. But is that a moment, a memory marker for her that tells us maybe we should pay attention to every little thing? That's one of those unnoticed moments. Another quick story was the bus just arrived at camp one day. Little girl got out, her counselor took her to the cabin, and this particular cabin had the little bunk beds and a couple little drawers And the little girl immediately started unpacking her little bag and was gently taking out each item of clothing and putting it in the drawer, one at a time, with a lot of care. And it was supposed to be lunchtime, so the counselor says, come on, we got to go, we got to get in line, there's things to do. And the little girl just didn't move, just each item, taking it out, putting it in this drawer. And the counselor came over and said, hey, sweetie, we can do that anytime. We've got to go get into lunch. And the little girl looked up and she said, this is my first dresser. The lady said, it's what? She said, this is my first dresser. Mm. And she was just so enthralled in the moment of having a dresser, right? Something that you and I have. We have lots of dressers. We've opened up drawers 10,000 times. But to this little girl, she had heard about dressers, and now she finally had one. She'd gone away to this camp, and she got to have a dresser, something we would never think about as having importance or having value or having any meaning whatsoever. It was incredibly meaning to this little girl. Now, again, what does that mean? Spiritual moment? No. But here's the thing. When you meet kids' needs in simple things and practical things like puzzles and dressers, all of a sudden they start listening more intently to all the other stuff you say, because we're meeting their basic practical needs. We exposed them and we gave them a moment that registered with them. We didn't even know about it. We didn't know that this girl needed to complete a puzzle or needed a dresser. But when you do these things, they start to listen to all the other stuff you say. So a really impactful story is one of our trainers, national trainers named Dan. He told us this story just recently. It wasn't with a camper, but it goes along with the idea that we don't always know what impact we're having on people. And he had been a middle school basketball coach and coached a lot of awkward middle school boys, right, in basketball, who were learning how to dribble, learning how to run, learning how to do just the basics. And as a great guy, he'd been one of our camp directors, and he'd learned a lot about kids over the years as a teacher, but also as a camp director. He spent time with this awkward kid and just made sure that he got time on the court and did all the things he was supposed to do. He was just doing what he always does. Well, years go by and he gets an email, and his name was Tim. And so our camp director, Dan, gets this email from Tim. Hey, Dan, Coach Dan, do you remember me? My name is Tim so-and-so, and you were my middle school basketball coach. Well, Dan responds, hey, Tim, great to hear from you. Hope all is well. Glad you reached out. Well, Dan didn't really remember him because he coached hundreds of kids through middle school. So Tim emails back, no, I was just really curious if you remember me. You were my basketball coach and you this grade and this year, and you spent a lot of time with me, and I know I was awkward and I know I didn't know what I was doing, but you really cared, and I appreciated that. And Dan responds, again, thanks, Tim, appreciate it. Wow, I'm glad you reached out. Pray that all is going well in your life. And then a couple of days go by and Dan gets another email. No, Coach Dan, I don't think you understand. I'm in New York. I was standing on a chair. I had a rope around my neck. I was about to commit suicide. And I thought to myself, nobody will miss me. And then I thought, Coach Dan would miss me because Coach Dan cared. And he took the rope off and he started to relive his life, and he reached out to Coach Dan. Now, this is again years and years later. Coach Dan cared at some critical moments in this kid's life. And Coach Dan didn't know that he was making that kind of impact. He had no idea he was making that kind of it, that kid really needed it. And at a moment of a critical moment in that kid's life, and he's standing on a chair with a rope around his neck, the guy he remembers is the guy who just spent time with him playing basketball. Again, was that a spiritual moment? On one hand, no. On another hand, oh yeah. When he had that rope around his neck, that was a spiritual moment. So we can reach out and we can touch kids who are from these difficult, challenging, hard places. And these unnoticed moments can be so impactful, no matter what we're doing, whether it's at a camp or mentoring, or whether you just play games with kids, or whether you foster them or adopt them or hang out with them in Sunday school. When we reach out, these unnoticed moments can be so valuable. We have to remind ourselves, and our human nature is, I feel like I didn't make an impact because I didn't see any immediate results. And this is a battle I fight with our volunteers all the time, because they're human, right? We want to see the input. We want to plant the seed and see the crop immediately. The law of the farmer says it doesn't work that way. The law of the farmer says you plant and you wait. And we're so human, it's hard to wait. But we know when we deal with children, and especially when we deal with children from vulnerable places, that harvest takes a lot longer to see. But it is truly there.
No, definitely. And I think that we talk with people about that all the time. It's actually why, folks, we ask you to let us know how this podcast is impacting you, by the way. That's
Yeah.
part of the reason is to know how the different guests are impacted. So you can tell them as well. Just drop them a note and say, hey, thank you for that story. That really helped me to understand. Because there are thousands, probably millions of Tims out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Who we just don't know about. And as you said, usually, not just sometimes, usually we don't see the crop. We don't see the harvest. We're just sowing seeds and doing what God has before us. So yeah, thank you for those stories. It's fantastic.
Tonight is the night of the technical difficulty. All right. So Jeff, you focused in on kind of talking about your ministry and for the children and how you guys care for children, right? But that's not all that exists in this equation with foster care. There are birth families, there are foster families, there are lots of other people that are coming around these kids in various ways, and you guys in particular are really also focused on foster parents and focused on the families that have these kids in care. And so just would love for you to just kind of unpack a little bit about how for the children, like how you guys support foster families, maybe even kind of talk a little bit about for those of our folks that are listening that are unfamiliar with the foster care system, just a little bit of the realities of families who have kids in care and what are some of kind of the common profiles, kind of common things that we see that are hurdles that you guys are trying to help conquer in helping families to stay engaged in the foster system?
Well, one of the first things we noticed right away was when you're able to take foster kids from a foster family, it gives them a week of respite, right?
Yep.
A desperate time of rest.
Yep.
And that's just so needed and so critical. Most counties have systems and programs set up for that. It's just hard to implement them all. It's hard to always get people to come in and say, I'll take a child for respite. So a lot of times we get great feedback from, thank you, I just needed the break myself, right? We got a great letter back from a foster mom last year, said, I heard about your camp. I heard that my son might be, able to go. I didn't think he would be able to stay. I dropped him off. He stayed all week. I was surprised he stayed all week. I got this wonderful note from the camp counselor who praised my son up and down. And I thought, you're talking about the wrong boy, right? Because she said, you must have a different child than the one you're praising here, right? But again, when you take kids away for a week, they act differently. They don't always act the way they do at home. We do that on vacation as well. So here's a mom who said, wow, I didn't think my son would be able to be away. And he did, and it gave me the week of rest. And she said, when I read that letter of all these wonderful glowing things about my son, stuff that I don't always see, it really helped me refocus that those things are in him, and I need to continue to draw them out. She said, I was kind of at my rope's end, but this week off gave me the rest, and this list of great attributes that he really does have helped me refocus on him. So there's lots of little things like that where siblings get to come together. We have a lot of sibling connections where sometimes siblings get split up in foster care and adoptive care. And sometimes they've come back together at camp and they haven't seen each other for a year or sometimes years. And so sometimes the families love the idea that, hey, can you specifically make sure that the siblings get together at the same week at the same time? Because they recognize the value of that sibling time together. Because, two different foster parents may have two different boys or two different girls, et cetera. And they want, again, foster parents are so wonderful. They recognize that this is a great need. So those are some of the things that we see. Part of when we're trying to encourage our own volunteers to step into that foster care arena is that, again, we don't train foster parents, but a lot of our volunteers become foster parents. So part of what we're trying to do is come around them and support them, either with respite care or with just a team that says, I know what you're going through. And sometimes we have foster parents reach out to us because they know that we get it and they don't have to explain themselves.
Sure.
When you're talking to strangers about your child and some of the issues that are challenging you right now, you have to explain everything and people don't always get it. So when they talk to somebody who's sort of on the inside, somebody who's been around a lot of foster kids, have been around the system a little bit, you don't have to explain everything. And it's an easier conversation to kind of open up about what's going on. I mean, we have foster families contact us about other needs. We're trying to, under the For the Children umbrella, grow into meeting needs. And we know with COVID-19, there's going to be a lot of needs coming up as we start to open up and get back to school and do different things. So one of the offerings that is happening under For the Children is the opportunity to sign up where you just meet needs. Like, hey, they need a dresser, they need a mattress, they need sleeping bags, they need sheets, whatever. So we're signing up new churches now under those opportunities where foster parents can put out a need, and it's through another church program. But it really helps people, again, step into that zone where we're supporting those foster families. They're doing such critical work, and they often feel alone and left out. And so anything we can do to come alongside and partner with them is an opportunity where we would like to grow and help.
Yeah, and I love the idea that you're giving this really accessible thing that people can do. A week
Yeah.
of their life, they can take a week of vacation. They can do this. You're going to train them. You're going to stand them up so that they're ready to do this. But what it does is it gives them a way of really tangibly putting their toe in the water. And for some of them, their answer is we're going to commit to foster, and we're going to do that. But all of the other ways that people are finding to be mobilized, meeting tangible needs, providing wraparound services, all of those kinds of things. And I love the ministry model that you guys have that really, because it's centered on the local church, like this really helps to catalyze a really kind of full and complete approach to foster care ministry in a church. And it just, I think as you're illustrating all of those different things, like I don't want our listeners to miss that sometimes we unintentionally send the message to folks in our church that really the only thing you can do is you can adopt, you can foster. We have these kind of life altering kinds of things that we say, that there are a lot of folks that are just not in the place to do that. And I think you guys are creating accessibility to give a wide variety of people the ability to take their gifts and talents and abilities and bring them to bear. And so thank you, because the service that you're providing to the body of Christ and the ripple effect of that is vast. And those 15,000 people are affecting a lot of kids, and they're affecting a lot of communities, but they're also affecting a lot of other people like them, and bringing other people to the table in a lot of different ways. And that's a message that we want to continue to reinforce, is that part of this in orphan care is this is not optional for those of us who are Christ followers. Everybody has a role to play and something to do. Gospel enterprise. And I'm very, very thankful for you guys in your ministry, and the way that you're leaning in to give people really practical ways to approach that.
A foster parent is jumping in the deep end, right? And sometimes if you tell people, gee, I want to help these vulnerable children, well, you got to jump in the deep end or nothing, right? What we're able to do is come along and say, well, you don't have to jump in the deep end. How about the middle of the pool, or how about the shallow end, right? How about just get in for a little while, just 5 days. Can you handle 5 days? And people realize, hey, I can handle 5 days. That wasn't so hard. I mean, it was challenging. It was intense, but when you do intense things, it's very rewarding too. If you went and it was easy, you'd say, well, was it worth it if it was easy? So they get to do it for 5 days. And then if they join our mentoring program, they get to do it over 9 months, right? So if they can't take 5 days off, they can join the mentoring program and do it a Saturday for over a 9-month period. And with these other programs that are beginning with providing goods and services, wraparound, gives other people chances to get into that zone. And we've been working with a guy named Bishop Blake down in Texas. And he says, he says, foster care is one of the few things that are actually given a mandatory statement in the Bible, like James 1:27, widows and orphans. It says right there to do these things. It doesn't always say to do parking ministry. It doesn't always say to do all these other things, but it says to do those things. And a lot of churches struggle, like, how do we get in that zone? Well, this is just one way. There's lots of ways you can get in that zone. We're not the only good ministry out there doing good things. There's a lot of them. But to get into that zone is a valuable opportunity to serve. And again, it comes back to can the church and state work together? If we can't work together, we got a problem, right? And we've got to find a way for the church and state to work together. And the state needs it. They are desperate for more foster parents. They are desperate for wraparound care. They are desperate for stuff because it's a growing deal, right? And with COVID, it's even worse. So they need the church. They need faith-based people to get involved and be a part of that. And why not? They need it. It's a mandate in the Bible. Let's jump in that zone.
Absolutely.
And as you talk about the pool analogy, I'll just keep that going a little bit here. And you don't just throw someone, whether even in the middle of the pool, you don't just throw them in without training, right?
That's right. Oh yeah.
Right. Make sure that they're not going to do damage and destruction as they're,
That's right.
as they're doing these camps, as they're connecting with these kids who are from hard places. A lot of them have issues that if you don't know about, you might do stuff unintentionally. And so that's what you do, is you train. You're the director of the training, right? And so it's a big part of your job anyway. And so I love how you guys do the training. I traditionally, now during COVID, it's had to take I want to talk to you about a little bit about that too. But how do you guys do your training? And as you talked about it with me, you do your training really to allow the people to learn from spontaneous moments, which I think a lot of times during training, we just have it, okay, learn this information, and then you go home and hopefully it will be in your mind and in your brain, and you'll know how to do it when you experience these issues. But as you talked about with me, you have really a different approach than most people do when it comes to the training, at least that I've seen. Can you just talk about that, and then really how COVID and has caused you guys to pivot and what your training looks like nowadays as well?
Sure. So traditionally, if you wanted to become a camp director, most of our ministry opportunities start with becoming a camp director, starting a camp chapter. So you show up at a 6-day camp that is actually happening. The camp goes for 5 days, but the trainees show up for 6 days, and it's an immersion experience. You live at the camp with the kids, not in the same housing as the kids, but we'll take you to a classroom about 6 hours a day. But about every 2 hours, we leave the classroom and go see and experience the camp in action. So if we'll train on how to run a great chapel service, then we go out and see an actual chapel service. If we train on how to do registration with the kids, then we walk out and see registration. If we train on how to handle nursing and medical needs, then we walk out and see the nurse and all the medical needs, right? So it's a great lecture with observation time. And what I noticed over the years of doing these 6-day trainings was so much of the training happens outside the classroom, not just observation, but I started to use this little phrase, OAT, off agenda training. So I'll give them an agenda that says, here's where we talk about fundraising. Here's where we talk about behavioral needs. That's on the agenda. But when we're out walking and talking on the campground, when we're having breakfast, lunch, dinner in the cafeteria, when we're sitting by the pond watching kids fish, other questions start to come up. Well, Jeff, you said this in training. Now, what did that really mean? And all of a sudden, we're back to training. We're back to discussion. We're back to how to apply it in a setting that's no longer in the classroom. And great training takes place when I call off-agenda training. It's just in these moments when you walk and talk along the way. And when you're living at this campground, you can have that opportunity. It reminds me of a message I heard from a pastor years ago that a lot of Jesus' miracles took place when he was being interrupted. He was on his way to Samaria and this event happened. He was on his way and blind Bartimaeus cried out. He was on his way somewhere else, and the guy in the tree climbed up the tree and was saying, Jesus, what are you doing? And he said, let's go have dinner. And he was being interrupted. He was outside going to and fro, doing something else. And at camp, we're not necessarily being interrupted, but we're going to and from. And there's great observation moments and great spontaneous moments that pop up that you can't plan for on a training agenda. And so it's a great moment. Now, the challenge with that is how do you convert that over to a virtual training? So this summer, we had to convert all of our training from face-to-face training to this virtual training because of COVID, which was no easy task. And I had to study a lot about it, like a lot of you guys do. How do we convert this material? So my attempt was, the observation piece was so valuable. We went back and found some video footage, as much as we could get our hands on. And it was just average everyday video footage of a campground in operation. And we would talk to the trainees. Okay, imagine you're at camp. You're not in your living room. You're at camp. What do you see on the screen? Let's observe together. Let's look together. What you think you see is just a couple of kids bouncing around. But what I want you to see is, where's the counselor? Where's the child specialist? If something goes wrong, if they're by the water, is there a lifeguard? I need to start having you focus on, instead of saying, oh, that's nice, a couple of kids are walking around. No, I need you to focus on, if you're the camp director, what else is going on? What else do you need to be prepared for? What's coming up next? Are those people in place? If you've got adults around there, how did they get there? Who recruited them? Who trained them? Starting to refocus how you see the world. Was it easy? It was certainly not easy. Did it go over as well as I wanted? No, but it was our first shot at it. And sometimes your first shot is your first shot and you learn from it and you grow. But I think we started to plant those seeds of observation in a lot of our trainees that they can't just see a typical scene. They have to start thinking differently about what they see and what it means and how all of these things took place, that you can do more than what you see, initially. So that was our shot at virtual training this year with COVID. And the test will be whether they can start their camps up next summer and be successful. And we trust that they will. It'll be a steeper climb, right? Everybody's had a steeper climb this year with virtual training, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean you can't be successful.
Absolutely. And I think it's also something that moving forward, it will actually be good for us to have both options.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it will open doors that may not have been there absence of virtual training. So,
yeah. I think part of virtual training.
So Jeff,
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I want to hear what
I think part of, yeah, I think part of virtual training, as challenging as it is, it makes us refocus on what is the meat and potatoes. Forget some of the stuff that we've put into training over the years. That's just the niceties, which the niceties are always good. It helps enhance things. But when you come down to it, you just got to come down to the solid basics when you get to virtual training. And here's the core stuff that you really have to know. And so I had to go through and cut out a lot of material, rearrange a lot of slides, narrow stuff down, not take out content, but just focus content. And I think that's now when I go back and do my live training, I think I'll have more time to focus on the most important things.
For sure. One of the things we always do with our guests, and we want to close out our time by asking you a couple of questions.
Sure.
And the first one is, what is it that you've read, listened to, or watched recently that's impacted the way that you think about how we can love orphan and vulnerable children with excellence?
Yeah, well, I've got a very specific book I'm going to share here, but a couple others that are more general. This book that I've got, Phil, are we still on?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So I've got this book. This is a tough read. It's called Predators, Pedophiles, Rapists, and Other Sex Offenders. So in my business, I've got to read stuff like this. If you're a foster parent, you probably don't need to read this, but I've got 9,000 kids showing up at camp every year with 15,000 adults, and I've got to read stuff like this. And as hard a read as this was, and this was pretty brutal to read, I've got to make sure, Phil, you said this, that we train people, that we put people in place that are prepared, and that we keep the bad guys out, right? That's essentially what this comes down to. So that's a book that I read recently that was startling and striking. We've been in this business for a long time trying to keep kids safe, right? You want to minister to kids, but you've got to also keep them safe. And when like I said earlier, if you meet kids' needs, they'll start to listen to other things. But when kids are scared, they don't listen to you. When kids are frightened, they don't want to listen to you, no matter what you got to say. So that kind of a book right there is the type that institutions, bigger organizations need to be a part of, just because we got to keep kids safe, right? Some of the other general stuff that I've been involved with is the Global Leadership Summit out of Willow Creek, trying to keep my leadership skills up, trying to get our other volunteers to sign up for that. It's a great 2-day simulcast that all of our volunteers can sign up for and just be a part of. As a guy who's studied leadership a lot, I've been rereading this book called On Becoming a Leader, a classic in the leadership. And again, this book, as I've been going back through it, On Becoming a Leader by Warren Bennis, I look at it, and again, it's solid basics that we can skip over sometimes. And that if we're not doing it, it's like foundational stuff for a house. If you don't have a good foundation, fancy doors and windows don't matter if the foundation is cracking, right? So foundational stuff, as we reach out to our camp directors and our mentor directors, are we providing them with good leadership? Are we providing them with opportunities to lead well? And of course, going back to the example of Jesus, in so many times where he had compassion, he had patience, he was interrupted, and that was okay. Trying to instill that into the foster care community that we're a part of, that so many kids seems to be at times a bother, or they ask incessant questions, or they have behavioral challenges, and yet we got to be patient and empathetic and compassionate and say, you know what, I can do this. I can be patient. I can work with these kids. I can make a difference. Even though I don't see that harvest, that again, we talked about that. It's so valuable that we hold on to that hope that we know is there, that we know is important, that we know is valuable, even though we don't see it. We hold on. These kind of books keep me motivated and keep me at a level where I try to employ that to our leadership teams and our volunteers. We just did go through this transition, and if your groups are going through any kind of transition, we went through a sort of a name change. Royal Family Kids Camps, but our corporate name is now For the Children. So as we went through that change, we found this great book. It's called Managing Transitions. So if your organization is going to go through some transitions, name changes, brand changes, logo changes, man, this is a great book on working through that whole transitionary process. We get married and connected to logos and brands and names, and sometimes rightfully so. And so when there's change, it's hard, and we want to manage it well. And so we just want to be as effective as we can, as our new title says, For the Children, to be able to speak nationally to what we do and internationally with some of our chapters overseas. Things are very different overseas. We talk about that the language is different and culture is different, but boy, the kids are the same. They just want to grow up and be kids. They just want to be kids while they're still children, and have kid issues and kid fun and kid joy and kid happiness. And so all these things are so different overseas, internationally, but boy, the kids are the same. And it's a joy to be able to see them and see their lives connected as well.
Definitely. Well, those, again, I'm always excited and I'm excited and a bit also concerned when I haven't read any of the books that you read, because now they're on my list, which is ever growing, but I'm excited to get those and check them out. So the last question, folks that are listening, what's coming? What person has most impacted your thinking on how we can love orphan and vulnerable children with excellence?
So that person to me is our founder, Wayne Tesh. He's semi-retired now from the organization. He's no longer the president, but he's the guy that came to our church and spoke those many years ago. He's the guy that had that vision when he was 12 years old and when he was 24. He's the guy that started that first camp. He's the guy that called me in 2006 and said, Jeff, would you move your family and come work 400 miles away and take this journey with me? And working alongside him, he's an encourager, he's a motivator, he's a mentor. He has shown me through his daily living that he cares for these kids so much that he'd get on a plane and he'd be gone 150, 200 days a year on the road, talking to churches, talking to camp directors, raising money, raising awareness, doing the things that had to be done. And I tell our directors this phrase all the time, and it applies to Wayne. I say to the directors, the kids we serve have no idea how hard we work to do what we do. A common line we get from kids at camp is, so how much do they pay you? Well, I'm a volunteer. I don't get paid at all. What do you mean you don't get paid at all? I thought you lived here. I thought you worked here. I thought you got paid a lot of money to be here. It's like, nope, none of that is true, right? They have no idea. They're 10, they're 12. They don't know. Mm-hmm. And for Wayne, kids that have been to our camps, they have no idea there's a guy named Wayne Tesh. They have no idea he was on an airplane all those times. They have no idea he was away from his wife and away from his family. That is an example to me that he has planted seeds across the nation and across the world, that there are kids, I think, that will show up in heaven and walk up to him and say, Wayne, you don't know me, but I'm partly here because of your efforts. And I think that's going to happen to so many of us. I've been studying this for a long time, this impact that we have, unnoticed impact. And I think we're going to walk the streets of heaven and people are going to come up to us and say, you don't know me, but part of the reason I'm here is because of what you did. Either you gave a camp scholarship, or you gave it an offering, or you were a backer of this, or you helped support that. And that's part of the reason why I'm here today. And I think that's going to be true for so many people, that they're going to be amazed at how much impact they've really had on people on this earth, and they just don't know it yet. They don't see it yet. Wayne has had that impact on so many lives, and I believe each one of us has actually had a very large impact. We just don't know it yet. And we won't really know the full impact until we walk the streets of gold.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Jeff. I'm encouraged, so encouraged I was encouraged when we hung out for coffee. I'm very encouraged today. This conversation, I just want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this, and I have no doubt that our listeners will be better for it.
Yeah. Well, let me say to you guys, thanks for what you do, right? Again, kids don't know that you're in a studio right now doing this, right? But you're helping kids. There are volunteers out there who are going to listen to it, and they're going to be appreciative that you guys took the time and the effort, churches, nonprofits, et cetera. So let me thank you guys. On behalf of the kids that will be touched by your work and effort, let me say thanks on their behalf.
Jeff, for just being a part of the show, for sharing what God is doing in your life, in the ministry. As he talked about the transitions But some of the things that are staying the same is just their heart for the orphan and the vulnerable, and just being able to give, as he said, a lot of respite, a lot of wraparound care, different things that they're really wanting to do as a ministry, which is why really they have changed the name to be more holistic than just a camp. And so what do you think just in general, and any other thoughts just about general? I know that Lifeline does a lot more work really with birth families, the reunification side, things like that. And I would definitely want to make sure that we touch on that a little bit too, just so people know that this is their first, foray into this conversation.
Sure. And I think, I love what they do in the camps and focusing ministry on kids. I love the fact that it's a trauma sensitive ministry, and that they're holding a camp that takes into account the hard places of that. And I love the fact that providing respite care and like wrapping around foster families is a big portion of their work. I think a couple of things that I just want to make sure to say, and I feel that I'd be kind of delinquent if I didn't, is one, I think a big emphasis in the local church has to be on wrapping around those foster families. Jeff didn't really say this, but it was kind of implied in his answer that the statistics are right around 50% of foster families don't continue to foster beyond 24 months. And so fully half of the people that step in to get into foster care have one or two placements, and then they're done. And generally the reason is because they're burnt out. And that's where the church is kind of the perfect model for doing this. I mean, God has this thing rigged, right? Like we have this community that can come around foster families and can wrap around them and provide extra support for them. And so there are layers of support that ultimately can help these families to stay engaged longer. And the truth is, the longer people do this, the better they get, the better their skill becomes in just kind of knowing how to experientially how to walk through some of these hard things with kids. And so I very definitely love that and think it's the beginning of a journey but churches are still going to have to seize upon doing something else. And they're very child focused in what they do. You're going to bring people out of the woodwork, and you're going to have to be ready to mobilize them into doing other things, providing meal support, prayer support, transportation support, doing respite care events in your church for families. All those kind of things are kind of work together and conspire together, raising up respite families that can do this stuff. So it's not just once a year that a family's getting a week off, but that they're getting a weekend off or getting a week off fairly regularly. But we're not doing more damage to the kids when we do that, because these are people that they know and that they're invested in a relationship with, and they don't feel like they're being transitioned out of stability into instability, because that just undermines everything we're doing. I think the last thing, Phil, and this is a huge passion point for me, I just want to make sure and say that really, I think when we look at the goal of the U.S. foster care system, the primary goal of the foster care system is to seek reunification and reconciliation in families. And so it's about kids going home to the birth family, and for that family being restored and being healthy. And I believe it at my core that's a goal that's not only not inconsistent with the gospel, it's a goal that's squarely consistent with the gospel. And that if we really believe that coming to Christ and being made over through relationship with Christ and by the Holy Spirit, if we really believe that there's this transformation that takes place because of what Christ does in us, and as Christ resides in us, then we've got to believe that's the hope for broken families too, right? And so when Paul, and I know I've said this on the show before, but if you haven't heard this diatribe, let me get up on my soapbox for a second and say, go read 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Paul says we are ambassadors of Christ, and in verse 20, and he says we have been given the ministry of reconciliation. And so as ambassadors, as representatives of the King in this context, we have been given the gospel in order to fix things, in order to repair things. And ultimately what's ultimately to be repaired is our brokenness because of our sin, and for us to be reconciled in relationship with God. But really practically, that also talks about there's a right here, right now component to that. And so when the church begins to bring the gospel to bear in the lives of birth families, we're seeing families that have the potential then to take advantage of all these resources and all these assets that the government and the church and everybody else is pushing toward them. And we're applying it to a transformed life. And these families have the opportunity to be put back together, ultimately for the glory of God, like as a testimony to the worth of the gospel. And so I think many times we can jump into these conversations, and when we focus on the kids and we focus on ourselves and what we're doing to keep kids safe in temporary care, we can leave out and sometimes even vilify birth parents. And that's not to say that many of these situations, the neglect, the abuse, the indifference, the things that go on they're not bad, they're reprehensible, right? Like they're awful. And we don't want to minimize that at all. But there's a counterbalancing reality for us in the church, that Christ died for that. Mm. Christ died to pay the penalty for that, and to bring restoration from that. And there's potential in the lives of those families that no matter where they are, no matter how bad they've been, there's a chance, right? And the gospel is that chance. So I'm off my soapbox, but I think, and I don't think Jeff was not saying that.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
Let me for anybody that's going to say, hey, you kind of unfairly went in on it, I don't think he's saying that at all. I think that we just have to be really conscientious at some level in this conversation, that we're making sure that we're having all of it, because new people are coming to this conversation all the time, and they're seeing pieces and parts of it that we're having, and quite honestly, the reconciliation and restoration conversation, the birth family conversation, is not nearly of a level and a visibility in Christian circles. We're not having that conversation enough. And so, and yeah, we're super passionate about it. And I'll put a plug in for our own ministry. Our Families Count ministry mobilizes churches and teaches churches how to do that. And so if you're out there and you're listening and you're saying, hey, we're trying to figure out like, that sounds good, we'd like to know how to jump in and do that work, we love nothing more than to jump in with you and talk about how, your church can be mobilized to do that kind of work. So, but yeah, offline, Jeff and I were actually talking about some churches that we know in common, and partner churches, and man, those churches do exemplary jobs of these camps, and the stuff they do is just, it's just incredible and is so good. And so I can't recommend their ministry highly enough.
Yeah.
And think, if this is something that you feel like your church has the resources and the ability and the calling to do, definitely reach out to them, because they're a great ministry organization. They're doing this for the right reasons, and they're very skilled at what they do.
Absolutely. And you can find the website for the children at the show notes for this episode. You can definitely go check that out. And like you were saying in there, Jeff is, I just want to reiterate that. Like, we're not saying here, Jeff was saying that they don't care about all those things. They absolutely, they just do a different part of the ministry. They are, and that's okay. Actually, that's what we talk about on this show. It's a collaboration. It's absolutely, they are sitting in their sweet spot, and they're doing it incredibly well. And so, but like we said, we just want to make sure that if this is your first foray into this, and you're just, dipping your toe in, as he talked about, that we talk about that side of it as well, because it isn't talked about much. It really isn't talked about much. And it's, like you said, it's often vilified. And so I do want to say we're gonna wrap this one up, because it is a little longer than we expected to go on this episode, but that's because we had good stuff on this episode. So, but I'd be remiss for not talking about the blockbuster hit movie that really it kind of shows in movie form the Royal Family Kids. Just as Orphanology was the New York Times bestseller, the movie Camp by our Think Orphan guest. I believe he's episode 6, maybe 7. It's camp. And Johnston Moore made this movie, and he's a champion for all this work as well. He's a great friend. And
he's our buddy. And so we can do nothing but grin when we say his name, right?
absolutely. John, you are laughing along with us. Check it out. It's not a blockbuster hit. I'm not going to use the adjectives that I have used in the past with John as well, right? To his face. And he's probably used them as well. But it does give a good picture, really, about what these camps look like. And you know what? It's for all the, I could never write a screenplay. So I commend John for the great work that he's doing. If you knew some of the screenplays that guy could have written, you would be blown away. So all that to say, John, we love you. And I am just looking forward to getting this out to you. And by now, you've listened to the whole thing. So we are excited to finish up another episode with another great guest. As we've talked about over the last few episodes, if you want to give to this podcast to keep us going, to be able to keep putting out this content with these people that are fantastic people from all over the world, you can go ahead and go to providenceworld.com. There's a spot for the Think Orphan podcast. You can go ahead and give gifts there. So thank you for that in advance. We just want to, again, thank you for your download. Thank you for your engagement. And we do hope and pray that you take everything that you are learning from this podcast and you use it to help you to know how you can love orphan and vulnerable children better and better each and every day. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.